I've had a lot of questions about comics recently, specifically how to make them. Admittedly, I've invited this chaos by opening up topics in past videos, then saving them for quote-unquote later. But today, later has arrived. Today I'd like to start a series that takes the process of making comics and breaks it down in real time. Or at least as in much real time enough so not to waste your time or bore you to tears. This is Comic Blueprint, and in it I will take my amateur knowledge of comic books and construct a sample comic to demonstrate how it's done, step by step. Now, you might ask, does this mean that I'm not working on the Witchborn comic anymore? To which I say,
never, never, never.
I'm definitely working on that comic still, but I want to be able to show you my thoughts and processes on a comic that isn't one that I'll be afraid of spoiling or revealing any secrets. So I've devised a simple comic with characters and a story that I can share entirely step by step as I craft it, without worrying about spoiling anything for anybody who wanted to read Witchborn. And so let's get this started with the first bit of the process of comic creation, character design. Okay, the first step is coming up with an idea for your comic, but because footage of me thinking for days and days would be boring, so instead I will share with you how I came up with the ideas for this comic while designing the main character, and share a few tips and tricks along the way that I wish I had known when I did my first comic. Most story ideas come from the characters, so in a way character design is part of the first step. You want to have an interesting, dynamic, and compelling character that can interact with any world or setting that you come up with. Otherwise your reader will have no one to root for, no one to grow with, or no one to mourn. For me, all of my stories start with a character. For the webcomic that I'll be working on in this series, I started with the main characters first, and then let them inform me of the plot and scenarios that the comic would be all about. So my main character is Efeldrin Bloodveil, a warrior from the underworld, who you might recognize from my previous artwork and my Baldur's Gate 3 video. Efeldrin is a character that I came up with a while ago. Originally, she was created as a D&D character for a test run of a boss fight. She was a tiefling, shadow magic, sorcerer, hexblade warlock. That's a big mouthful. I really didn't have a story for her other than she looked goth, dark, and attractive, like a stereotypical shadow warrior, but was basically stupid with no life skills and way too much magical power for her own good. I eventually converted my character sheet for her into an actual character concept in the form of a Hero Forge miniature. I really like their website and I love making miniatures on there, and whoever made the kit bashing function, you are the best. I was so impressed with her look that I eventually drew her based on that original design in Hero Forge. But as time passed, I drew her again and again, realizing that I really liked the aesthetics for her character, but I needed a story to match that. And then along came a concept that I had for a YouTube video series, and I decided to finally give her a story that matched her awesome looks. Okay, so to start visualizing your character, all you need is a pen, like my trusty 4-in-1 color pen, a sketchbook, and a Pinterest account. I first build a Pinterest board of vibes and inspiration for the character. I've done this a million times, and for so many characters that it's a habit and a part of my process now. I like to have a visual library for what I'm going with for the character so that I'm not starting from scratch when it comes time to draw. Here's a quick tour of Efeldrin's board. These are a little out of date, but this is generally how I organize my ideas for a character. I have a few folders for props or specific parts like the packed weapon folder or the tattoo design folder, and outfits. I also have a character inspiration board where I keep images or illustrations of characters or artwork that makes me think of the character I'm making. Then there's the for character board. This one is possibly the most important folder that I have for my character process. I stole this idea from Ginny D, specifically this video. Go watch it. The idea is that you take 4 fictional characters that best describe aspects of your character. So for me, I chose Gamora from Guardians of the Galaxy since her backstory is similar to the one that I wrote for Efeldrin. I'll get to her backstory in a little bit. Raven from Teen Titans because her dark, spooky magic is exactly what I want to have for my character. Faye Valentine from Cowboy Bebop to represent her seductive yet tragic side, and Gert from I Hate Fairyland, or Magic from X-Men, or Flatline from DC Comics. You know, I haven't really settled on the 4th character yet, but basically think small girl with massive weapon is the aesthetic that I'm going for. So, you mean like Wapeach? Maybe that's the 4th character? Anyway, with my reference dropped into my favorite free program, PureRef, I start to lay down my ideas for the character. Basic shapes, sketchy lines. I'm letting my pen freely go on the page because if I think too much, I may focus on just one idea or limit my scope of the character. That's why I work in pen, because I can't get rid of anything, so I can just let my ideas flow messily and freely as they want to. This way, as I think about the design of the character, I can visually brainstorm aspects of her that will tie into her backstory. I'm taking the general sketches here now and transferring over to a digital format to start working out the details of the character. I'm still keeping my work very, very loose, so if I change my mind, I won't feel any loyalty to one sketch. But at this point, I already have a pretty good idea of how I want her to look. And usually I do this stage in my sketchbook, but it's easier for you to see me work this way. So I'll continue to make some more refined drawings of the face and body, eventually transitioning over to the silhouettes and general forms of the character. I like to focus on the shapes and general silhouettes on the character so I can get a good feel of them before adding the details. If the silhouette is dynamic and interesting, then the details will enhance that later, but firstly, the silhouette is what will get the people's attention first, not the details. I picked up this method of character design from a book called The Skillful Huntsman, which should be called How to Design Everything. For real, this book is super helpful and very easy to get. It's super cheap. So go pick it up if you want to have an awesome example of silhouette design and a general how-to for character designs for just about anything from video games to illustrations or comic books. My silhouettes are a bit more refined in this because I'm doing this digitally. Generally, I like doing this on paper. Again, I'm gonna say that over and over again because I like the more sketchy feel. It's harder for me to get rid of the bad sketches if it's on traditional paper, and my process can evolve through trial and error. But I've drawn this character a lot before, so I have a pretty good idea and feel of what I want her to look like. So while I'm ironing out what design would look good for her comic iteration, here's a bit about her story that I'm thinking of as it relates to her visuals. Efeldrin was born in the material plane to her tiefling druid mother. For years, she never knew her father or what had become of him. That changed when she was 9, on the Day of the Dead, where the planes of the living and the dead draw closest. Efeldrin's shadow magic awakened unexpectedly. Drawn by its power, she was pulled into the underworld, leaving her trapped in a realm she barely understood. It was there that she met her father, the shadow elf Calthar Bloodveil, a warrior bound to the will of the goddess of death, the Raven Queen. Calthar led the Bloodveil, an order that brought structure to the chaos of the underworld by conquering kingdoms and keeping the madness of the undead spirits and wandering souls at bay. Calthar took Efeldrin in, shaping her into the perfect weapon. Her body was adorned with intricate tattoos of bone-like designs, as a mark of her devotion to the Bloodveil and the Raven Queen, who became her patron as she trained as a warlock. Over the years, Efeldrin fought relentlessly to prove her worth. Her shadow magic and combat skills elevated her to the status of a fearsome warrior, though her drive was fueled by a desperate need for her father's approval. Her memories of her mother and the material realm, once cherished, faded into a distant blur as she continued to wage war in the name of the Bloodveil. The underworld itself is a chaotic mix of vibrant afterlife aesthetics. Imagine the celebration and spirit of the Land of the Dead from Coco fused with the raw, over-the-top visuals of Heavy Metal magazine. It's a world where the colors and the traditions of the Mexican afterlife collide with the brutal violence and the dialed-up to 11 warriors of the 80s fantasy. But while she can summon and wield her massive sword, La Sombra, or launch a fireball into a pack of demons, outside of battle, she's utterly lost. Navigating basic life skills or forming relationships with those who aren't trying to kill, maim, or manipulate her is a challenge that she's far less equipped to handle. This contrast not only leads to humorous and awkward moments for her character, but also reveals an emotional depth behind her otherwise archetypal persona. At her core, Efeldrin is more than a stoic warrior or a powerful sorceress. She's a character of complexity, humor, and vulnerability. And this idea, a heavy metal cover girl but with a personality, was the driving force behind her story, blending raw power with an emotional and relatable heart. The main conflict in her story is when at some point the souls stop flowing into the underworld and to the goddess of death. The underworld has been cut off from the land of the living and no one can get through, allowing the devils and the hells to claim souls to torment without any resistance from the Bloodveil, their sworn enemies. Since she is the only one that can travel to the material realm as one that was born there, Efeldrin is sent to find out what has happened and declare war upon the devils and those who conspired with them. But this is easier said than done, as she gets stranded without backup in the material realm and must learn to fend for herself outside of a combat scenario. Once I feel like her story is well represented by the silhouette and shapes, I move on to design her overall look. The main idea here is to not make a character that is overly detailed, or has complex props, or is asymmetrical. Okay, so I may have broken a few rules of comic character design. Generally, you want to follow these rules so it's easier to draw your character again and again and again as you're working. But I have some solutions to make this character more manageable. First things first, I'm going to take her massive and complex sword, La Sombra, and model it in Blender. I don't want to lose the epic heavy metal shape that this sword gives to our heroine, so I'm going to do myself a favor and make a 3D model that I can import into whatever scene I'm working on to help with perspective and the complexity of the design. I recommend this to anybody who has a complex prop that you know will pop up in your comic a lot. It's worth spending a month or two to learn the basics of Blender so that you can have a reliable reference. I also like modeling it in 3D because then I can get it 3D printed and use it with my action figures that I use for planning out poses and designs in the writing phase. Yes, there is going to be a video where I break down my writing process, don't worry, that comes next. Now that I have the sword modeled and ready to go, I can drop it into the next step, the dreaded character turnaround. Look, I get it, this can be tedious, but you really need to have these before you start your comic project, so that you can easily reference every angle of your character while drawing. Psst, if you make your props in 3D, you don't have to do this for them because you already have it figured out, but don't try this with your character until after you draw your turnarounds. I'm starting out with an anatomy sketch of the body that I tweak to fit the style that I want for the comic. Note that I'm not looking for perfection at this stage, and I won't be fully rendering this version of the character because it's just an initial concept. If I need to change something about the character design later, I want the sheet to be easy to navigate and edit. For Efeldrin's design, I went with a mix of modern fashion and classical fantasy. A little like Final Fantasy, but without the trains or cars. The world is kind of a magipunk, a world where everything is powered by magic, but you'll still see people with swords and armors and carts and stuff. So all of that goes into my thought process for the design of Efeldrin. Side note, for those of you wondering why her skin is gray or why she has horns, originally, like I said, she was a tiefling, but I decided instead to make her mom a tiefling and her dad a shadow elf, so she still has the horns from her mom's side, but gray skin and long horizontal elf ears from her dad. Because horizontal elf ear supremacy. I will die on this hill. Another aspect of the design is how I want Efeldrin to fight and move in the comic. If she was a character like Superman and was physically powerful and strong, I designed her outfit to match that, showing off her muscles and physique. Or if she was a zippy speedster character like Tracer from Overwatch, I'd emphasize her legs and a slim build and a cocky behavior. Efeldrin, however, is built like a twig, as her body is basically held together by magic. Warlocks, am I right, D&D players? I wanted Efeldrin's magic to come at a physical cost to her body so that she has some weaknesses. For Efeldrin, magic burns energy from her body's calories, since it's a literal part of her. Anytime she casts a spell, it's like running a mile. So her metabolism works overtime so that she doesn't pass out or hurl mid-battle. Usually this isn't a problem for her, but now that she's in the material world with no backup, she's got a whole new battle to face every time she fights, forcing her to pick and choose her spells and how much energy she can expend on devils and fiends. So, how can she hold a massive sword if she's got no muscles? Magic. That's why. For real though, I always pictured her sword being super light for her, allowing her to cast spells while also swinging the massive blade around. But this is only because it's bound to her via her patron. Don't get me wrong, Efeldrin has the lithe body of a dancer and moves as such, but without magic enhancing her body, she is not as physically powerful. She can't throw a punch and knock out somebody in one hit. She needs magic and spells and a gigantic sword to make her powerful. Unlike some other Mary Sue characters that I could put JPEGs of on screen. Dum, 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 dum. Anyway, moving on, I'm going with a simple color palette that will emphasize her bright tattoos and magic. Speaking of tattoos, hers are a reflection of where she's from, while also giving a grim reminder of her entrance into the underworld, as her traditional La Calavera paint from the Day of the Dead was seared into her skin and then emphasized with tattooed details by the blood veil. These tattoos are a way for me to narratively hint at her past and purpose without slapping a great big S on her chest.
On my world, it means hope.
For your own comic book characters, make sure to look for elements or props that are easily recognizable, so that they can signal to the reader who and what this character is instantly. This is why Efeldrin wears lighter armor and has small nods to the underworld, with little details like the skull pin in her hair or her tattoos. Her outfit also shows her personality off as a kind of a showboat and seductress with her outfit, but even her high boots have rivets that show off her edgier, more dangerous side. It's okay to show flaws or contradictions in the character design as well. Efeldrin, for instance, basically has a giant stab me here midriff, but this is because she's always looking for attention, even on the battlefield, hinting at her insecurities and flaws as someone who needs to feel seen. Okay, now that we've drawn the body, the head, and the sword, all in positions that we can reference while we're working, we can finally get to the fun part, callouts. In this case, all we have to do is the tattoo designs, which I'll be making in Adobe Illustrator, since I want to be able to scale them and deform them in any way after I'm finished, so I don't have to redraw them over and over again. I'm also later going to make a custom stamp brush for Clip Studio and Photoshop so I can further ensure my laziness reigns supreme. For real though, make sure that you draw out any details or props you know will be a big aspect of your character so that you can have a solid reference going forward. I feel like I've said that a lot, but it's so helpful. I mean, especially when you're like 60 hours into a project and you have a sheet of paper that tells you how to draw a character's earrings or belt or something instead of having to guess every time. With that, we have our character designed and ready to go. At this point, I like to print out the final character sheet to keep on my desk while I'm drawing the comic, or take the turnarounds and sculpt a maquette of the character for even more practice and reference. But for this video, I believe we have gone over the entire process of the character design fairly well. Designing Efeldrin's character sheet has made me super excited for this upcoming comic book blueprint series. I'm going to share as much as I can about my process of making comics. Up next, I'm going to be doing a video about how I write scripts, so get hyped for that. But in the meantime, let me know in the comments below if there's anything that I should cover in this series, or anything else you'd like to see from this channel. As always, thanks for watching, like and subscribe. Now go make something awesome.